neat ones there. What's that? Oh, sorry, yeah, okay. So just for a moment, maybe have a look and see. You might spot yourself there. I know Siobhan is there on with her flying gear on. It's going viral. Anna is there. She runs for cancer every Saturday morning. I think, you know, the park run. So she runs that every Saturday morning in Belfast, which is fantastic. And Anya is there with her family, her 2 grandsons. And I have to say, Colin is my boyfriend because he hugs me every time he sees me. But he was our baby. When we last had a family gathering before COVID, Colin was just a baby. And he was with us this year too. So it's just lovely to see year on year. Yeah. We've had 2 beautiful weddings as well in our positive living group. So always worth celebrating that, isn't it? Beautiful brides. And the Clare Wing, we do have an image of that there. Yeah. Sorry, sure. There's our beautiful bride, Caroline. She got married a month ago. Isn't she beautiful? And we obviously celebrate Christmas lunch as well, and we have afternoon tea every year. It's part of what we do. So we're living our best lives here. We're doing our best, aren't we? Okay, so I'm going to stop that, and we move into our session. Just bear with me a minute. Actually not coming up on the screen. Oh, we'll just keep on the phone. Thank you, Jane, our IT expert. We all need one, don't we? Okay, so we're in a beautiful setting, aren't we? I hope you've all managed to have a cup of tea or coffee or something. Have you and mingle? I think I've met most of you, but you're all so welcome. Today is about being together in this space. It's about making memories, and our team, as we said, is like around just living our best and preparing for the rest. So they're kind of the themes and the talks that we're having today. Usually in Ireland and nationally, Breast Cancer Awareness Day falls on the 13th of October, but we're celebrating it today because we don't generally work on Sundays, but sometimes we do. But in order to get you here, today is the day. So today is the day for us being together. And a lot has happened to many of us over the years. And in this space, we always acknowledge, you know, that we are trying to live our best lives, but we also acknowledge that we've had a lot of losses too throughout the year. And we like to create this space for hope, for healing and for hope. So I just wanted to share a little bit with you about this building. We always try to find a nice setting where we can sit and enjoy, you know, the surroundings as much as we enjoy ourselves and each other. So this was actually a building that was bought by the nuns, and it was a convent back in 1688, right? And then it became a hospital, so an industrial type setting. So hospitals, of course, are businesses. In 1772, 1803 it became a fever hospital, and then in 1811 it became a surgical hospital, followed by a medical hospital. But most importantly of all, I think, and this is interesting, in 1815 it was known as the Richmond Asylum Unit. Okay, so be careful what happens here today. Notice what's happening in the walls, and all be safe. So it's just a little bit of information about the building, but it's beautiful, isn't it? It was bought by the Irish Nurses and Midwives Organisation back in 2013. And then in 2018, it's been developed into this beautiful education centre for everybody to use. So yeah, let's enjoy it. The space is beautiful. So we're here, and I'm just going to do a few house rules, I suppose, before we move on. There's no fire drill this morning, so if you hear anything, we have to evacuate down the stairs. We're not using the lift. Out the front door you came in and to the right of the car park. Okay, so I think that's straightforward enough. When we're downstairs for afternoon tea, the same. We go out of the building to the right, out the door to the right, and find our way out the main door, and find ourselves in the assembly unit in the right of the car park. So that's that done. So the other thing, of course, is if you have phones, if you could please silence them or turn them off, that would be really nice, just to enjoy the space we're in. The toilets are outside, so if you want to hang your coat up, you can hang it in the hallway there, but the toilets are out to the left. And yeah, just make sure you can see and hear us. I think, can you see the screens, everybody, and can you hear us? Yeah. Everything okay? Yeah, good. Okay. And if you want to get up and move, because it is about exercise and movement as well through the day, please don't feel that you have to sit for the 2 hours. Just get up and move about if you need to. Okay, we don't mind. And just in terms of after this, we will have it recorded. It'll probably be ready next week, Jane, on YouTube. Yeah, early next week on YouTube channel. So, and that's really nice. So if you feel like you've missed anything, you know, in the presentations, you can always go back on them. That's always nice to do. Okay, so that's myself there. I have to, I don't know if I need to boast or I need to like keep this very quiet, but I have been nursing for 40 years this year. So that's a lifetime. And mostly in oncology, actually, in the UK here, so I'm quite proud of that. And it's one of the reasons I am here, because I'm very passionate and dedicated to cancer care, and mostly living your best life, and the quality of care that can give people. Okay, so I'm going to invite Cynthia to light a candle. It's part of what we do. It's become our ritual, I suppose, living our best lives. So Cynthia, if you'd like to come up, I know you have a few words to say, and you're very welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Marie Keating. So, in this metastatic journey, we make friends. Our local friends. These friendships don't grow for common interests like books, music, shows, but from the strength and the feelings and the same pain. So we will light the candle that represents our friendship, our onco friends, for everybody here, our friends that couldn't come today and the ones missed.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, I hope everybody's okay. This really is to acknowledge what people go through in the room and what families go through. It can trigger, but in the same token, one of the things we do within this space is acknowledge loss, but acknowledge the best way we can live as well. These two pictures are very significant and poignant this year. We've done the Camino, the Marie Keating do the Camino most years. And this year, Anya in the group, who's very crafty, where are you, Anya? Hands up, down at the back. Painted a stone in a heart shape in the centre through with the metastatic breast cancer ribbon on it, lots of little glittering diamonds, and asked me to carry it along the way with Leo Blennerhaus, who is Denise's husband, as you know, and Denise passed away probably, well, almost 2 years ago. So we had the special honour of carrying that stone along the communal way, and posted a picture every day of where we were at, and it was a huge responsibility making sure we had the stone in our bag and not in our case, because you're packing and unpacking every day. So, but that was a huge honour, and we did it, and that the photograph on the right hand side there for me is where we lay it in the sun. So thank you, and thank you for the thoughts around that. And something that I acknowledge very much is that, you know, not everybody in the positive living group or with metastatic breast cancer would be able to do that journey. So it was really important that we did it for you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our agenda. So we have a full morning. We're going to crush it all in as much as we can. Is that right, Seamus?
That's right.
Seamus promised me 12 slides and I think we've got 40, but anyway, we'll get through that. Yeah, so I'll introduce you all individually. But we have a really nice roundup of what, you know, cancer is, where we're at in Ireland, where we're at internationally with metastatic breast cancer. And you know, I'm very proud to say I'm very proud of Siobhan as being the patient you know, advocate, the public patient involvement person who has took a huge leap forward with work she has done over the last couple of years. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We have Louise Mullen here as well from the NCCP, you know, who's our leader in survivorship in Ireland. So we'll be looking forward to hearing from Louise. So no pressure there, Louise, at all. And then this afternoon we're going to look at, you know, the time. It's time to talk. So we're going to talk about palliative care. We're very good at doing the palliative care talk and positive living, aren't we? And so in that special place, it's safe we talk about it. And many of our group members are with palliative care teams, and that's about living your best life. You know, it's not about waiting to die. It's actually living. And that's what it's about. So we want to kind of, I suppose, get those clear messages across to people so that there isn't the worry and the fear around it, and that we move more towards it than away from it. We have some lovely stands outside. So Valerie Smith from the Irish Hospice Foundation is there with lots of resources. So please do go and see her and talk to her. We have Ark House. So we have Billy and Bernadette from Ark House, and they're there to give you an idea of what support services are available around Ireland, because it's not just in Dublin, they are everywhere. And we have Anne Loach. Anne Loach turns up everywhere with her bras and her wigs and all that is to offer, you know, for actually living your best life and doing the best you can. And we have Helen from the National Cancer Control Programme, from the Community Alliance Group, which is, I'm sure Louise is going to talk about, and it's phenomenal. It's taken off really well in Ireland. But we are a very supportive nation. We love caring for people and we love supporting people. So that's the main thing. And Noel McCaffrey from Exwell is not here yet, but he is doing a session on exercise. I'm not quite sure what it means, okay, because you could have us running up and down the stairs, but hey ho, if that's what it is, that's what it is. Okay, so I just want to do some welcomes and some thank yous, and then we'll get on with it. I would like to welcome and thank Pfizer, Novartis. I know we have Ruth here, Ruth and Suzanne from Novartis, AstraZeneca. We have our own Jen. So Jen moved away from the Marie Keating Foundation, but she's still there with us. Jen, your hand up. And we also have Ronan, I believe, and Sinead. So really nice to have you here. Thank you. Thank you for your commitment and the continued support. We have our experts panel even, who I'm going to introduce to you individually. I'd love to thank our Marie Keating team. We're fabulous. Even if I say so myself, but you know, we've had conversations this morning and it is so busy everywhere, like we are just full on. But I'd like to thank Liz Yates, our CEO, who's here with us. Liz, thanks for your leadership and steering always and keeping us in line. And we have our communications team Jane and Kathy, always here to support and ask for lots of media attention, etc., etc. But that's what it's about. We have Bernie Carter, Assistant Director of Nursing in the back, right down the back, who, again, you know, from a nursing perspective and the team, we're here to support and help you today in whatever way we can. We have Fiona and Lisa. Now, Fiona, anybody from Positive Living will know Fiona. Fiona does a lot of the administration around the Positive Living programme. And Lisa, but they've been phenomenal, in Fiona particularly, in just getting this set up today, getting the afternoon tea room set up, and there'll be some lovely treats there. So we look forward to that. So, and thank you, Lisa, as well, for always reading in to help us out. Have I missed anybody in the Marie Keating? Because if I have, I'll be shot. I don't think I have. And I suppose, yeah, I want to say a special thank you to Roseanne. Where's Roseanne? Put your hand up, Roseanne. Probably down the back as well. Because Roseanne, I have named and employed as our Director of Art and Craft within the Positive Living Group. Roseanne turns up with all these goodies, and they will be a surprise in your goodie bag later. And I'd also like to thank Leo Blennerhaus. He's not here today, but he is Denise's husband. And you'll find a lovely calendar, a smaller version without adverts to the previous one in your bag to showcase in your own homes. So that's really nice. Again, the ladies outside, Valerie from NCCP and Roaches, and Bernie and Billy. Billy is probably hiding outside. He's terrified. So you all have to go and visit Billy later. And very, very importantly, I think I'd like to thank our health professionals. Total respect and gratitude to all of you for being here today, because we know how busy it is. And we know when the slides come in late, but it's not your fault. It's just the pressure that comes upon you. But thank you, we do appreciate it. And I'm going to call our Siobhan our own, because we own Siobhan now. We'd like to think we own Siobhan, but we know we don't. But Siobhan has shown passion, commitment, focus and determination for the number of years that I've known her within the Positive Living ladies and I know all the Positive Living ladies would say the same. You know, together with Anne McBreen in Belfast, an All Ireland survey has been conducted. And I know Siobhan is going to be so proud to tell you what the findings are today. There are 4 posters at the bottom of the room. Please take some time to absorb those and read them. And we can get them out to you as well electronically. So that would be really aspirational reading, I would say, because at the end of this, what I know what Siobhan's objectives were really to improve the journey of, you know, of all of you. But also to improve, you know, metastatic breast cancer for people coming forward, and it could be members of your family. And also just to improve, you know, what is happening with side effects and the uncertainty that you live with every day. So we own Siobhan, she is ours, and we're not letting her go. And I don't mean that really, but we do want to own you. I'd like to thank Adele and Clodagh from the Richmond team here for supporting us, and also for Wayne, who is around and about supporting our AV. And most of all, I want to thank you ladies and gentlemen in the room. It's lovely to see some gentlemen in the room, because you have been affected by metastatic breast cancer. And you're the people who know too well how this affects you as an individual, but also as your family. But here we are, living our best life and preparing for the rest. So thank you. I'm going to invite Louise now to the stand. And as I said, Louise is our National Lead for Cancer Survivorship within the National Cancer Control Programme. I don't need to say too much about Louise. She's been here and supported us every year. So thank you, Louise. Yeah, you can take over there.
Thank you, Helen, for that very nice introduction. Just going to put my my timer on here so I don't run over too much. It's really lovely to see everybody here, such a full room. And I just wanted to acknowledge how lovely it is every year to have that remembrance ceremony, how moving it is, and it takes courage to come and present that too. So thank you for that. My presentation is really a little bit about the policy and infrastructure around cancer and cancer services in Ireland. And later on, you'll hear perspectives and information from clinicians and the clinical part of this and the patient part of this. But what I'm going to concentrate a little bit is about on that structure around policy and how we can kind of move forward as a country around cancer services. So I work in the National Cancer Control Programme, which is a program within the HSE. In Ireland, we work closely with the Department of Health, who have the technical brief for cancer policy in Ireland. And my special area of interest and my role is as a lead for cancer survivorship. And I also program manage for psycho-oncology. So it's really the psychosocial aspects of cancer. But inevitably, in a small program like the NCCP, we work across the other areas in the NCCP, and our model really is the cancer continuum. So that's from prevention to early diagnosis to treatment, to survivorship, living with cancer, and palliative care. So that is the cancer continuum. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit to the 2006 strategy. And there's really a reason for this, because this strategy was the second national strategy in Ireland. Each one covers a decade-long period. And this was an important strategy because it signaled the centralization of particularly diagnostics and surgical services into the 8 cancer centers. It proposed a network of around that with systemic anti-cancer treatment hospitals. It signaled the establishment of the NCCP and the development of rapid access clinics. So it was a very important kind of signal of how our services would develop. But what it didn't have is it had a focus on surviving and survival statistics, but the words living with cancer and cancer survivorship didn't appear in this strategy. So when this was being evaluated mid the strategy in 2014, an international team came from Canada, from the Netherlands, and from the UK. They were mixed in discipline, and they took a bird's eye view of evaluating this strategy. So they went and talked to clinical sites. They talked to us in the NCCP, which was established in 2007. And they went and talked to patients and advocacy groups as well. And they had a number of key areas that they reported that were kind of missing from the earlier strategy. And the one that's kind of important to myself and the people in this room was they really identified that there really wasn't any focus on how you lived after you got your cancer diagnosis. So that was whether you were in that category where you received the news of, that it was likely that your cancer would be cured, or you would go on to be cancer-free, or that you would live with that cancer for a period of time until the end of your life. So when the 2017 strategy was being developed, this was a key focus for the group. So the strategy in 2017 was actually written in 2015. But there was a change of government, so it was published later than that. But it was formed by a steering group, which had all the kind of usual stakeholders that you would think of that would be present in writing a cancer strategy. But what it also had, it had a very important patient forum. Some people in this room were on that forum, which sat in parallel to the steering group, which would have been kind of there were patient advocates on the steering group, but the patient forum was all patients and patient advocates. And it was chaired by the Department of Health, and there were liaison members between the two groups. It had an extremely powerful effect on how the 2017 strategy was written and framed. And I can't overestimate really how that has played out in the last 10 years. There was also a public consultation, and there were 225 submissions in that. So I read every one. I was in charge of that, and a lot of the focus from those written submissions was around, I feel after my initial cancer treatment, I'm living with cancer. I don't feel that there's anything for me in the services in the system for me, and I feel very lost. So that was just sort of the tenor of them, but they also concentrated on really the psychosocial outcomes of what's happened after having a cancer diagnosis. So this was in the psychological, the physical side effects, and the social aspects of cancer. So the vision of the 2017 strategy was really different from ones that came before. So you'll see it there. It says, together we will strive to prevent cancer and work to improve the treatment, health and well-being, experiences and outcomes of those living with and beyond cancer. The term living with and beyond cancer was chosen deliberately to be inclusive of people that, that have had a cancer diagnosis and are either in the area that you are here in terms of metastatic or advanced cancer, but also those who receive news that their cancer will be cured. So the strategy has chapters and areas on psycho-oncology, survivorship, and integration across the cancer continuum. So I'm getting the signal, so I'll just speed up a little bit here. But what fell out of that in the last number of years is other policy papers. One was the National Needs Assessment, which was actually launched by Simon Harris in 2019, which identified actions that we've been taking in the last number of years, and also the psycho-oncology model of care, which really signals an integration between community and acute sector services, and recognizing the quality in our community cancer support sector and the voluntary sector. And it was actually, just signaling we need an increase in the number and capacity of support services. We just simply don't have enough. So in the subsequent years, multidisciplinary teams have been set up in eight of the cancer centers and the Children's Hospital in terms of psycho-oncology teams. They have psychiatry, psychology, nursing, and social work on them. So they are an initial infrastructure for developing psycho-oncology in the country. The other important initiative is the Alliance, which Helen mentioned. And this is a recognition that a lot of work in terms of cancer support was already going on in the community by community cancer support centers, but also national organizations like Marie Keating. They were doing this work, they were doing it well, they were nimble organizations that were really meeting a need. So instead of reinventing something which we couldn't ever have done or paid for or created in a short period of time, we formed an alliance with these organizations and a really collaborative process. So this is actually a formal alliance now, and these organizations are in most communities. They offer the supports that are really needed, the psychosocial support and services. Some of the organizations are outside this room with brochures, counseling, information, programs, physical activity programs, peer and support groups like Positive Living, and access to MOD and lymphedema. And there are more services. And that's just the kind of coverage that these organizations have. We also started out really from the beginning by providing small grants and funding and doing what we could with what we had at the time, an extremely small survivorship budget. But that has grown, and as you have seen in the last two budgets, through the sort of advocacy and persistence of a funding group within this alliance, we have been granted extra, a significant amount of funding, which goes back into these organizations. So we're really delighted about that it's been recognized financially as well, because that's important. Organizations that have a fundraising and charity model, it's appropriate that we would also contribute to funding the amount of services that they provide. So this is from the annual report. I'm not going to go over it all, but it's available on our website. But as you can see, in 2023, there were over 8,000 new attendees at the centers that are and the services that are in the Alliance. So these are new clients attending, and then there's over almost 14,000 visits, and there's a huge number. There's about 40 organizations, not quite 40, and they're different sizes, but they really do provide a lot of services to people on the ground. So here are two self-management programs that also exist that the Community Cancer Support Centers deliver, but Marie Keating delivers Thrive and Survive, which is a 6-week self-management program. Some of you may have taken it. And these are also delivered by some of the hospitals. The other program is the LACES program, and this happens at the end of treatment. It's a workshop. It's a one-off workshop, but it's really signposting and information. And this is inclusive of all people living with and beyond cancer. It was deliberately designed so that these resources would be as inclusive as possible. And what we're focusing on as well is really, again, bringing that collaborative model forward of empowering patients, working with healthcare professionals as much as possible and community supports. I mentioned the Cancer Patient Advisory Committee because this is the second iteration of the forum. They had to close the forum because that was the patient forum was just a time-bound piece in terms of the strategy, but then they formed this patient advisory committee, which sits in the Department of Health chairs. And it's interesting because the input from the patients is extremely important and very kind of, they have regular meetings. So, but what's also really great about that group, I sit on it as a liaison, not a member, but they inform the cancer policy unit as well. So the information flows are very much two-way. And I think that is to our benefit. There's healthcare professional forums within the NCCP, so we take the information and try to reflect the issues that clinicians in particular and healthcare professionals are having within our system, which there are many challenges at the moment, particularly around capacity. And then we have networking events for that Alliance of Community Cancer Support Centers where these organizations meet regularly. So in conclusion, our current focus is on needs assessments, like Siobhan and Seamus are going to present later. The patient voice, again, informing what we do in a policy realm and in an implementation. We also do research and we participate in different research. We look at the practice in cancer centers. We've done this recently for metastatic patients, and we found a lot of alignment with what has been found in the needs assessment around this cohort, that there's a lot of variability in the system, that there's a lot of problem with capacity, and that, we really acknowledge that, that we need to do some work to make that system better. We acknowledge the challenge of that, and that the lived experience and the voice of the lived experience is extremely important in kind of pushing and giving energy to push policy implementation forward. We need to plan a little bit because I think there, like survivorship initially, there will be need to be some services need to be built. They're not actually there. And then other aspects of it will be linking supports and services that are already there and making sure that patients know about them and clinicians know about them. We need to think about strategic recommendations for the next strategy. I'm not sure that this cohort of living with cancer is adequately reflected in the current strategy. So we have an opportunity in a couple of years' time to make sure the voice is stronger in that, because that helps for us when we're actually using that policy to implement change. And I can't underestimate the importance of advocacy and the patient voice. It really does make a difference. And we really appreciate the efforts that people make and it is an effort to make their voices heard in the space. So I thank you very much for listening. And as I said, now it's my turn to listen. And I'm happy to take any questions later on when we have the panel. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Louise. Excellent, and congratulations on all the work on community and abroad and promoting also. I suppose before we move on, and just alluding to what Louise had talked about there budget-wise, Liz will probably talk about this in a little while, but just for you to know that the Marie Keating Foundation are also looking at tackling cancer care and medicine access within the budget, and it's been good news this year so far. So just to note that. Now, our next speaker is Professor Seamus O'Reilly, who again is a huge follower of the Marie Keating Foundation. Thank you for always being here for us, Seamus. I know you had something very important going on this year. Can I say? I probably can't because a lot of people know anyway. But so Seamus had said to us that he wouldn't be able to be here this year, and I'm going, oh. And it was because his daughter was having a child, and I went, okay. And then he came back to us and he said he wanted to be here, And his daughter has since had a child, and never mind all this here. His daughter has since had a child, and her name is Florence Clare. And I think you have a beautiful role to play as granddad. So I'd like to invite you to the stage. I knew that would stop you.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you.
You're
It's
welcome.
really nice.
So now you have to get
Kind.
on with the work.
Thanks.
Put it back in a bag because.
I put a bit behind.
So Seamus, yeah, no, come on up. You're next. Your job is not done. That's a new job, but this is your job today, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks very much for the present. I wasn't expecting that. So thank you. We go to London tomorrow with the teddy bear. There'll be a seat on Ryanair for the teddy bear. Thanks for inviting me to speak today, and it's great to share the stage with my wonderful friend Siobhan. So this is Galway, where I'm from. We, like Cork, we also did not have a good day in Croke Park this year, but we're going to move beyond that quickly. So if we look at my talk today, really is focusing on where we are today in terms of cancer care and what's happening, what's happening next, and where the ideas for the treatments of the near future are going to come from, and where we feel the exciting fields are at the present time, and how care is decided. So in the pillars of cancer treatment, they're evolving. So we can see a bit like the cancer strategies, that it's improved over, that's become more evolved and more holistic over time. And immunotherapy is the current area where there's been a lot of interest in cancer therapy. When I was in training, it was really felt to be an area for odd people. But now it's very much into the fore, and I think it's a very good example of where your preconceived views about something as a therapy are totally reversed over time, and they need to be open-minded about it. I think for people in the room, you could say, well, how is my care decided on? How do you put all these pillars together? So the care is decided on at these international meetings. So this is for metastatic breast cancer, this is the Lisbon meeting, which is held every 2 years. And this is the most recent paper about it, which was published earlier this year. And the treatment is a series of algorithms, and the algorithms develop over time depending on how new drugs come into the system. It may look a bit overwhelming, but for clinically it's fantastic, because it means that on one sheet you can see where your decision making should be, and what the standard of care in someone on the Beara Peninsula should be versus a patient in Brussels. So these guidelines have leveled the playing field, and they also structure things because you have an international committee composed of both patients and global experts, and there's a security with this when you're at the clinical coalface of knowing what to do and what to do next. So I grew up in an environment before these were developed, and certainly I found them to be transformative. There's a great security with them, and they have been using them in patients with early breast cancer, but it's only recently been in the last decade or so that the metastatic guidelines have come to fore. Where the information comes from these guidelines is in research. So if we take it on the right-hand side, the practice, what people see in the clinic. So the story for Septon fits in with this. So in the clinic, there was a group of patients where the breast cancer came back very early after surgery. And people couldn't understand it because it didn't seem to make a difference whether the cancer was big or small. And so that patient group, they did more detailed analysis of that in the lab, and they found that they carried HER2 protein was amplified, and then they developed a drug that targeted called Herceptin, and that transformed breast cancer care dramatically in the last 20 years. And that's a great example of bedside, of clinical practice going to the bench, going to the bedside, and then transforming cancer care. So in Ireland, where these advances come in terms of integrating them into care are at our Cancer Trials Ireland meeting. So this is a national meeting that's held. It's held at least twice a year, where the clinical trials are reviewed, and we have all of international networks, and you'll see that there are multiple patient advocates on this breast cancer group. And then there are trials for each of the different subtypes and for each of the different modalities. And normally, you know, hospitals compete, doctors compete. With Cancer Trials Ireland, it's the one organisation where everybody collaborates. So it's a tremendously powerful unit because of that. And as a result of that, we have international studies, we've networked with international collaborative groups. So it really allows, you know, studies that are being done in Washington or in Berlin or in Australia to come into the clinic in Ireland. These developments have been paralleled by increasing involvement of patients, patient participation and involvement. And you can see here, these are two models of patient-centric principles, but also where patients are interacting with various outcomes within our clinical trials group in terms of more optimum therapy. The integration of patients into clinical trials was really pioneered predominantly in Canada. And what they found was that the patient trials, the activity of the trials actually increased with patient involvement rather than shrunk. And that was because the trials were, patient voice was listened to, and trials were adjusted in a way that made the trial more workable in the clinic, more acceptable to patients, but also had more relevant clinical outcomes when it came to the clinic. And now, in terms of clinical research, you really can't do a clinical paper or a clinical trial document or a working group without integrating patients. So this is for immunotherapy in cancer, and you can see patient engagement and involvement is at the top of this loop here. And then there's a patient-centric focus, but the one at the top of the arc here at the 12 o'clock is patient engagement and involvement. All of the other things flow down from that and are at a lower ranking. One of the important things about patient involvement is that it allows us to understand where things don't work out as well as it should. So this is an analysis from France. And in France, they have these huge databases. This is where they look at prescription databases for hormone therapy. And what they found is that if hormone therapy is interrupted, it's less effective in terms of preventing cancer coming back. And that impact is greatest in younger patients and becomes less in older cohorts. And what we have found is that part of that is that we can prescribe something, but when you're at home, you mightn't take it completely. And I mean, I think if you were to ask healthcare professionals how many of them complete a course of antibiotic therapy, you probably found very few of them actually completed. So it's not really a surprise that for patients on treatment for 5 or 7 or 10 years that they're going to adhere to it completely. One of the things we find that people don't comply with treatment is because the dose is wrong. That the dose has been assessed in a healthier population of patients than in the real world, so that the recommended dose for a clinical that comes out in the clinical trial is too high for patients in real life who may have other comorbidities or frailties associated with them. And this is a patient advocate-led survey called The Right Dose in the United States. And there's a Spanish link to it as well to increase diversity. And what they found is that when they look at patients, that the majority of them do not believe a higher dose is more effective than a lower one. But in a lot of the times in my clinic, I find that if you say to someone, this dose is too high, we need to come down on the dose, they're terrified that it's not going to be as effective. And they feel that they've failed the treatment, but also that the treatment is failing them because it's not going to be tolerable. So this initiative is being brought into the Food and Drug Administration in terms of the doses that are approved for our clinics, and having a more patient-centric focus on it will allow for a drug that's more compatible with good quality of survival, as Louise has pointed out. But also one that is more relevant in larger populations. I think when we talk about breast cancer medicine, We can talk a lot about the newer drugs like the immunotherapy and the Herceptin, but this study looks at hormone therapy given in addition to Herceptin in the HERA trial. So you can see it goes out to 160. So this is 15 years of follow-up. And what they found is that adding more stronger hormone therapy to patients in addition to Herceptin improves outcome. There are a couple of things with this study. The first is the long time frame that's needed in many of the trials to show a benefit. If you were to just look at the trial after, say, 10 years or so, we wouldn't get that, or 5 years, we wouldn't get that same result. But the second thing is that if the treatment isn't manageable or tolerable, it's very hard for patients to continue with it. And we often find that this is with hormone treatment, that the longest conversations in my office are not about the difficulties of chemotherapy, but about the difficulties of hormone therapy. And one of the things that's being brought into our clinics now is the complex menopause clinics that are used in the maternity hospitals. So we're referring our patients to the complex menopause clinics because the obstetricians and gynecologists and menopausal specialists have a bigger toolkit than we have, bigger knowledge skills, bigger subspecialty interest. And that's been a huge advantage in our services, having access to them. I know there are long waiting lists in the real world for many of them, but there's a phone call. You can make a call, you can do an email to say, these are the following issues, what would you advise? And that often is transformative for patients. One of the challenges in breast cancer medicine is why it actually comes back. And I think that of the cancers I treat, it's a very undermining disease, because it can come back 5, 10, 15, 20 years after initial diagnosis. When you've gone at, normally we say the 5 years, the all clear, etc. And you don't have that security of tenure with breast cancer. When we look at breast cancer, it kind of falls into two camps. The top one is the more rapidly growing tumors that tend to come back earlier after treatment. And then the hormone sensitive disease that can come back up to 5 decades later. And why does that happen? Why can something be hiding for so long and then become active? And what makes it active? But equally, what prevents it going away? We think that potentially the immune system becoming less active over time means that our immune surveillance is less. And as a result of that, the cancer then becomes active. But in the majority of cases, we don't know. It has led to a more, obviously there's a significant focus with the cancer strategies in the initial strategies of early treatment to prevent this late relapse. Now there's a focus on preventing this late relapse by more effective treatment early on, and potentially longer durations of treatment, which aren't always good in terms of quality of life. This is a complex slide, but it more reflects the activity that's going on in this space. So on the right-hand side is someone who has a history of breast cancer, and the breast cancer responds to treatment initially and then stops responding. And what happens here is that the breast cancer can go into a variety of different ways. It can still be sensitive to estrogen therapy, so you can go back on estrogen therapy, but in a proportion of patients, it will lose its dependency on estrogen. So more hormone therapy isn't going to help. And these on the left-hand side then of the slide, then are the various strategies and drugs that are being used in the clinic now to make the cancer sensitive to estrogen again, for instance, or to target in different ways that don't rely on that estrogen dependence. What we really want to get at for patients is that when the initial hormone therapy stops working, that we'll have a clearer picture of what genes are switched on and what genes are switched off, so we can target therapy rather than going on a treatment for a month or for a few months and finding it's not working. So in the newer things in the clinic would be taking DNA samples from the patient and using that to do genetic analysis that will guide which pathway to go on here, and then looking at these suite of different compounds then that will be available, so that the treatment is more targeted and more specialized, rather than let's try this, and if it doesn't work, we'll go to this, and we'll go to this, and we'll go to this. And the areas of this reflects the degree of expansion of therapies that are occurring. So these are the different drugs that we want to look at in this area here. Drugs which are radioligand binding drugs, which are drugs where there's an antibody that targets the cancer, goes into the cancer, and then there's a radioligand that binds to that becomes active then. So instead of the radiotherapy being given, it's given intravenously rather than given externally. And then there are the different types of radiotherapy. So sometimes when the cancer comes back, it might only be limited to a certain spot. So we would consider radiotherapy for that, or we would consider surgery. But these are a variety of different forms of radiotherapy that are used, which are more directed than before. And there's a huge area of evolution here with this, particularly with stereotactic radiotherapy, which is available in many of our cancer centres, and which is particularly important in patients with brain involvement. So when we look at the landscape, this slide here on the bottom of it really reflects the evolving landscape of new drugs that will become available in the coming years, or that are going to be looking at in the clinic. And I guess the take-home message really in this on the left-hand side is looking for different mutations within the cancer so that we can target the cancer more effectively, and that it's there's less wasteful treatment for patients in terms of a treatment that's not going to work, that's going to be more tailored. In Ireland, we're also looking at this study here called the Treat ctDNA study, where we're taking patients after curative breast cancer therapy, and we're measuring circulating tumour cells in their blood on a regular basis, and then seeing if we can intervene in patients where the cancer comes back with a new drug called Calistrant. So this study has been coordinated through Belgium, and there are several sites in Ireland that are involved in it. And I think it's going to be the way of the future in terms of measuring bloods for cancer within the blood system, analysing the genetic analysis of it, and then targeting the therapy accordingly. I said about the conversations in the clinic being about hormone treatment, but I think but it's also important to acknowledge that chemotherapy is I don't need to talk to this room about chemotherapy, but I think chemotherapy is hugely challenging. And in this paper here, they compared being an astronaut to being a patient with getting cancer chemotherapy. Except with an astronaut, they have a pre-training program. They're super selected, and they go into a pre-training program before they go into space. Whereas a patient diagnosed with cancer doesn't know they're going to be diagnosed with cancer tomorrow, so they don't have that. And if you look at the various hits that occur with chemotherapy in terms of immune function and problems with bone marrow and blood toxicity, it really, I think this slide really emphasizes the challenges for the average patient going through cancer therapies. And so in the future, what we're looking at and what we're trying to achieve is a more personalized therapy. So where we'll take into account things like the patient's immune profile, what other cancers they might have. So instead of a one size fits all, it will be much more tailored. This is the ambition. We're getting to the ambition. It's part of a journey. I think that the newer treatments that we have now are considerably better. I met someone I was friendly with a long time ago earlier at coffee, and the differences between what care was when we were friends and now is moved significantly, and the pace of that change is also accelerating as well. If we look at the cancer strategies, the second cancer strategy was really about cure. The third cancer strategy was about living better with cancer, and even that mindset of change, of that sophistication that was necessary and that was important, really reflects what we're aiming for. I think it's also important to emphasize that what we're doing today reflects decades of research. So for patients with, say, triple negative breast cancer that we're looking after in the clinic today, they're getting immunotherapy. They're getting a drug called pembrolizumab as part of their care. But the pembrolizumab story started in 1974. And if you look in drug development, you can see that for every compound in the clinic, thousands of compounds have to be checked out. So this is you could say this pathway is too long for what we need today, that it doesn't reflect the urgency of improving outcomes for patients. And there's a lot of interest now in making the clinical research easier and also accelerating the rate of which the discovery at the top can be translated into patients at the bottom. So when we look at immunotherapy for that as part of that, you can see that discovery in the 1970s, how it has transformed a multitude of cancers in now. So this is, Cancer Care 2024 in Ireland, and the various drugs in that are being used in a variety of different types from that one discovery in the 1970s. This is one example in breast cancer where we've got of the variety of different studies that are being done. So we in our clinics now, we have patients getting pembrolizumab and chemotherapy or atezolizumab and chemotherapy. And so we're seeing differences for those patients in terms of much more durable responses to therapy. Classically, when we give chemotherapy for breast cancer, the average response is about 6 months. But with these, the response rates are much more durable or long lasting. And while immunotherapy has an improvement, it still has significant side effects for patients that need to be improved. But we weren't seeing that kind of dramatic responses before with chemotherapy that we are when we combine these agents together. We're also using them early on. So if you take, in patients getting treatment with breast cancer where they get chemotherapy before surgery, what happens is that at the end, when the surgeon removes the cancer, they can find that there's still cancer present. So you could say that if you've been giving this chemotherapy or if you've been receiving this chemotherapy for 6 months and there's still cancer left behind at the end of the surgery, then whatever's left is going to be resistant to treatment. It doesn't make sense to continue the same treatment after surgery. So in lung cancer, what they've done is they've taken those cancer cells and they've made a vaccine with an mRNA vaccine, like the vaccines we've had for COVID, because the BioNTech started working cancer and then COVID came along and they changed over to COVID, but they've gone back to cancer now. So they're making a vaccine to your cancer, and then that vaccine is given back to you after surgery. So that's a trial that's starting in Ireland, led by Sebastian Traynor in Tala. And so for patients getting lung cancer surgery in Ireland now who've had chemotherapy before surgery, their cancer, if the cancer is remaining, that cancer is taken and they've got a personalized vaccine for the cancer. So the ambition is to have the same for breast cancer, because if they can do it in lung cancer, we certainly can do it in breast cancer. And to look at that as an alternative strategy. There is a vaccine study being done in Unicancer in France at the moment. But I think that this lung cancer study is really interesting. And normally breast cancer medicine leads cancer medicine. So we have to catch up now and get back. The lung cancer people can't take the stage. But I think, we're working on getting a group together to look internationally at how these vaccine and cell therapies could be accelerated into the clinic, similar to what's happening in the lung cancer field. We also find that giving radiation with immunotherapy makes it more effective. So this is the NeoCheck X-ray, study from France. So where we give radiotherapy with immunotherapy, and you can see that the response rate to treatment doubles when you do the two treatments together before surgery. There are newer drugs available. So this is a drug where you have 2 targets. So this is called a bispecific antibody. So normally an antibody only attacks 1 target. With the bispecific antibody, you have 2 targets with the same treatment. And you can see here the waterfall plot here. Down is good, up is bad. So down means response to treatment in the patients who have already had treatment. So these are really exciting drugs that we're starting to see in the clinic. We have them in lung cancer medicine, and they're starting to come into breast cancer medicine as well. And these are the other drugs that we are interested in. They're called antibody drug conjugates. So antibody drug conjugates are where you have an antibody like Herceptin, and you put a chemotherapy drug with it. So we've been using a drug called TDM1 for breast cancer for some time. Now there's a drug called Enhertu, which is also being used in Herceptin sensitive and non-sensitive breast cancer. And this slide here really shows the range of therapeutic possibilities here. There are 160 antibody drug conjugates in development at the moment. So it's a huge range of different treatments, and trying to juggle who goes where and what to do is going to be interesting. Do these drugs make a difference? Yes. So if you're going to left to right here, left is where patients with Herceptin sensitive breast cancer have standard therapy with Taxol and a drug called Herceptin. And you can see when they got Taxol, Herceptin, and pertuzumab, they did significantly better. And then they had antibody drug conjugates, and you can see the newer antibody drug conjugate and HER2, significant improvement in outcome compared to patients on a drug called TDM1. And the average survival then for patients with metastatic disease has increased dramatically. And these were the patients that were identified a long time ago in the study in Los Angeles, where they found that the cancer was coming back very quickly. So you can see in our lifetimes, this has been transformative in terms of the management of this patient group. These patients with HER2 positive breast cancer, there's a high incidence of brain involvement with it. And often things like radiotherapy can be problematic because of the brain effects that occur with it. So in this study, they looked at giving antibody drug conjugates rather than radiotherapy. And you can see, again, the waterfall plot, dramatic reductions in brain involvement with this. And also not needing radiotherapy and the side effects of radiotherapy as well for patients. So these are huge transformative advances that are occurring in our clinic for our patients. They're also combining these drugs with immunotherapy. So you have immunotherapy drugs and these antibody drug conjugates together. And again, you can see the waterfall plot, the Begonia trial and the Morpheus trial. You can see dramatic reductions in cancer size. So these will translate ultimately into early stage disease and into preventing cancer recurrence. And this is the landscape of these agents just for Herceptin sensitive cancer. You can see an enormous variety of different targets and different drugs that are in clinical development at the present time. The other area that's important is cell and vaccine therapies that we talked about. CAR T-cell therapy is used in patients with lymphoma in Ireland, and there's in the next 10 years, 1 million patients in America will have cellular or vaccine therapies that are in this group here. So moving those into the breast cancer field is going to happen probably in the next within the next couple of years also. What are the challenges in this? Part of the challenges is there are so many things. Who goes first? What do you pick? How do you combine them? We're finding it more and more difficult to fund academic studies, and oftentimes in the studies that are done, the treatment is given for a year, but maybe 6 months is as good as a year. But there isn't a financial incentive to do a 6-month study rather than a 1-year study, because if you're going to get twice as much, if it's going to be the shareholder benefit is twice as great with longer, that's more effective. Our newer drugs, like the pembrolizumab that I talked about here, is €8,000 per dose, which is once every 3 weeks. And the Merck that make it have a factory in Swords, and that factory is ranked up to make enough pembrolizumab to supply 500,000 patients a year. So the investments in the companies is huge, but the problem is that the drugs are too expensive for our communities. I think also I'm glad to see the exercise program. I think we need to emphasize health rather than illness in our system as well, and put more resources into cancer prevention. This is the cost of drugs over time. So you can see since the second cancer strategy, how drug costs have increased exponentially. This slide on the right then is the deals of the drug company deals that have occurred over the last decade, and in blue are the oncology ones. You can see the oncology biopharma research and development deals are greater than all of the other areas combined. So I think this leads to an area of great promise for patients in terms, you can see the results from the studies are phenomenal, but there are also challenges too in terms of equity, and we've seen that in Ireland in terms of the equity of access for public versus private patients with some of the newer agents. I think it's also difficult being a patient. I think that needs to be emphasized in our society. There's medical misinformation. There's dealing with the system and the challenges that Louise talked about earlier, and difficulties with coordinating care. And I think that's why Siobhan's work is so important, because it's a way of unlocking this and making this easier, not just for the patients actually, but also for the providers that are trying to help them as well. And I would encourage you to read this article, Medicine is Difficult. It's available online. It was published by the president of the Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh, about the challenges of being a doctor and about the difficulties of dealing with uncertainty. And I think that sometimes and we've encouraged all of our trainees and our senior people to read it as well, to just reflect on the challenges for the doctors in training that we're working with, who would be the next generation and the people that look after us when we're ill. A lot of patients say, well, one of the issues that I find in the clinic often is the patients come in and they're newly diagnosed with breast cancer, and it's like, what? And that's an issue, like what happened? And the majority of in the lung cancer field, you can say, well, you know, or head and neck cancer, you can say there's cause and effect here. But for the majority of patients we treat in the clinic, we can't say that, because we don't know what the causes are. There's also on the BBC website this week a concern about younger patients, and we're seeing a growth in the rise in cancer in younger people under 50, which isn't really explained very well. And there's concern that that's because of how we live. So on the left-hand side is a cancer cell, and what causes the cancer cell to become active, and the things that promote that, including things like pollution and plastics. And there's concern about microplastics in our environment, and we're seeing more colorectal cancer, for instance, in younger people. And we know that when you take plastics, it's broken down to microplastics, and microplastics are everywhere. In the placenta in our maternity hospitals have microplastics when they analyze them, and that can be carcinogen or can promote carcinogenesis. And so there's a lot of interest in how healthcare is making climate change worse, because it has the same emissions as Africa, the continent of Africa. It's the number 5 in terms of climate impacts globally. And you can see with cancer care where this is coming from. And one of the things we're looking at the moment is more sustainability in our clinic, and in terms of coordinating care, going to oral formulations, exercise prescriptions, and lifestyle prescriptions. And part of this is to make care quicker and easier for patients, with less hospital visits, easier treatment schedules, quicker treatment schedules, as part of this making our things more environmentally friendly. In the survivorship aspects, they've also emphasized the importance of managing physical and side effects after treatment, like Louise had talked about, and managing of chronic conditions. They also emphasize exercise. So this is a large French study, 10,000 patients, where they looked at exercise and cancer prevention. And what we find is that by exercise, it seems to reduce the risk of some cancers coming back, not all. So there's a need to move exercise and health and well-being into the survivorship space in patients, not just patients who are with newly diagnosed cancer, where you're trying to prevent it coming back, but also where you're trying to help people live better with cancer. So this is one of the studies that in this area called the Embody trial, where they look at integrating exercise programs into management of patients with metastatic breast cancer. In Cork, we've the Liam Mack study, which Jack Leeson and his colleagues are running, looking at exercise in patients with prostate cancer who are on prostate cancer treatment as part of this strategy. In our practice in Cork, we've tried to put in exercise prescriptions to patients, and the plan with the sustainability sheet that we have there is that we will have links on it to various lifestyle things that we can do, such as the exercise prescriptions, to prompt people to think more beyond just prescribing medications, but also prescribing other things that would help, and links to studies. So a lot of our patients on hormone therapy have great difficulty sleeping. So this is called the Sleepio trial. And one of the things we're going to look at doing is linking our website page to studies that would be of impact in terms of quality of survival, like this one, where it's very difficult to get good advice. It's really difficult to treat. And in someone who's going to be on a hormone therapy for 5, 6, 7 years, it can be a huge quality of life issue. So just to finally, I'd just like to say thank you for listening to me today. I think the landscape of treatment options has expanded dramatically for patients. Just being the data clearly shows it, and we're seeing that in the clinic in our communities. I think optimizing the discoveries that we're going to have in the future involves partnership with patients, including advocacy, including advocating with them for more resources in our services, integrating them, and ensuring equity of access for all. I think the advocacy part of this piece is hugely important, not just because of the audience that are here today, but we know that it makes that having two communities unified to advocate for improvements to stakeholders is far more effective than either group alone. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Seamus. Huge piece of work there. You're a renowned oncologist, we know that. I'd also like to mention that you are the lead in Clinical Trials Ireland now, so congratulations on that. And the next piece of work I think we're going to hear from Siobhan is actually you're a co-investigator yourself. So I'd like to invite Siobhan now to the podium. If you have questions, which I'm sure you have, please save them for the panel discussion. So I think most of you might know Siobhan by now, but Siobhan was first diagnosed with breast cancer back in May 2019. And she finished her active treatment in December of that year. But unfortunately, very shortly afterwards, in 2020, she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. And that can be known as secondary, obviously, as we know, or stage 4 of recurrence. So she had a lot of issues with back pain, fatigue, and decided to seek medical attention. But I suppose Siobhan might have been a little bit different in the fact that she was a scientist by profession. So she was able to know to seek that kind of information and advice. And she was also very much, I suppose, in the know about clinical trials, which obviously not everybody would be. So this is where Siobhan's energy and time went. And I do remember a time, and Siobhan, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think we all remembered it within the positive living space, the time when you decided that you were going to have to finish work, because the disease process was too much. But then very shortly afterwards, we saw Siobhan's energy revitalize itself into this space of, looking for the unmet needs of women in Ireland with metastatic breast cancer. And so it began, and I think it began around the table a couple of years ago, actually, at one of our MBC days, and Seamus, you were there too. And I saw a little conversation, beginning to spark. And we have a huge amount of work done since then, really proud. It's been funded by the Irish Cancer Society, but we own part of Siobhan, so that's okay. We've already decided that. But I do think, Siobhan has done a huge amount of work. We need to really acknowledge that. And in doing that, Siobhan is now going to come to the podium and tell us what our findings were and where we need to go next with this, because the findings are one thing, but the implementation of that is actually the next step, and where we're going to get the support to do that, and the funding, etc., etc. So really important piece. So Siobhan, you're very welcome to the podium. Oh yeah, and sorry, you have a leaflet on your seats, and it gives you an overview of the study itself. And please do look at the posters at the back of the room. So, okay, Siobhan, you're very welcome.
So firstly, you're all very welcome. It's actually the third time I've spoken at this annual meeting, and it is my huge pleasure to share the results of the survey. Now, for the benefits of those who haven't been at these meetings before, I think as you felt, and I hope you understand, basically we realised, all of us, there was a problem within the positive living group in terms of our care. In terms of knowledge around metastatic breast cancer generally compared to primary breast cancer, And I think for me, when I was first diagnosed metastatic after experiencing primary breast cancer treatment the year before, I found the whole experience very disturbing, because I recognized that we have fantastic treatment, support, care. Primary breast cancer is protocolized from a scientific perspective. When you hear there's a protocol, when you hear there's guidelines, when you hear there's standards, that gives you hope, because people are doing it the same way. There's someone watching it, someone collecting results, someone guiding you. We all got a liaison nurse when we were diagnosed with primary breast cancer. And I found it very disturbing that when I was diagnosed with what is a more significant illness, a more serious illness, a life-limiting illness, there was none of that. And I really found that very bizarre. And you know, upon joining Positive Living, which I did straight away, and it was definitely the best thing I ever did, I realized that it wasn't just me that was having these experiences, it was all of you. And actually, all of you gave me the inspiration, because it's very powerful when you're a patient to understand that it isn't just your issue, it isn't just your frustration. It was very much a common theme. And actually, what I realized very quickly was, as patients, we actually understood what we needed together. It wasn't just, you know, one person thinks this or one person thinks that. There was a lot of commonality amongst the group in terms of what our needs were, really around the psychosocial side of our needs. Yes, of course, the drugs are important and the medicine's important, but actually it's the other stuff that becomes more important when you're a patient. And that was a real awakening for me, moving from having spent my whole career working in medicines research and development, to realize sometimes it's more than just about the medicine. So that was my experience, and that was my frustration. And the first thing I realized when I started reading, because that's what you do, and that's what we've all done when we first get diagnosed, we go to Google. And what was really disturbing for me was the lack of data. The lack of data. And anyone I spoke to, thanks to my years working in medicines research, I had a lot of connections who gave up their time very willingly to answer my questions. I had many of them. And what I realized was that one of the core issues was that there was very little data. So I started thinking about what we could do, started talking to all of you. And this time 2 years ago, we started looking at the problems of data. And there's a few gaps in terms of metastatic cancers generally, not just breast. And this is not just in Ireland, this is internationally. We don't collect data routinely in our cancer registries. We have these registries all around the world, and in Ireland, they're actually on a mandated footing, i.e. That every patient in Ireland who's diagnosed with cancer, their data is put into a central registry. And they're really important for a lot of reasons, for outlining trends, for seeing what's happening, what's coming next, for looking at survival data, etc. And in terms of planning, how much money do you need to spend on a certain area? And what I realized very quickly was, not just in Ireland, in all registries in the world, the data on metastatic cancers is not collected. And so when you've got a hole in data, it's very, very difficult for people working in Louise's job in the National Cancer Control Programme, for example, in planning of any kind of a health service. Without numbers, that's impossible. So the more I looked upon it, the more I realized this is significant. When you start looking at funding, you know, Seamus has described what I think is very hopeful, which is there's a lot of research going on in the background. Research takes a long time. There's a lot of money involved in funding it. And when you start breaking it down and looking at, well, where's the money being spent? Of all of the research funding all over the world that's spent on breast cancer, only 10% is spent on metastatic, as opposed to 90% on primary. And when you start breaking it down, so I was getting really scared at this stage. And then the more people I spoke to about this and why is this and why is this arisen, frankly, you know, until really a decade ago, any metastatic cancers, but in particular metastatic breast cancer, which has been our focus, really our survival wasn't great, frankly. And there was a kind of feeling that when somebody is diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer over 10 years ago, and they're only going to live 2 or 3 years, really, we leave them alone. We leave them in peace. We don't really disturb them. We don't involve them in research. But that's changing. As Seamus says, it's changing today. It's changed. And it's certainly going to change going forward with all developments. And so we are living longer and longer. And there's more of us. There's 40% more of us every year diagnosed as metastatic cancer patients than the year before. So there's more and more and more and more and more of us. And so the question now should be, well, what do we do with these people? Because traditionally, you've early breast cancer where a lot of the focus and funding and investment has been made. And metastatic was considered less hopeful. It was, a terminal condition was considered less hopeful. And as I explained, very little data about it, very little funding. But now we're living longer. And for me, that was like, well, why aren't we switching our focus then to looking at metastatic? So this was where the initiative started to come from. And then, being realistic in the medical system and in the research system in general, you focus naturally on things you cure as opposed to what we need, which is care. And so I think that focus has always been traditionally on cure in the system, as Seamus has described earlier. Thankfully, there's more of a focus on things like exercise, etc. And that's all part of what I would call the care continuum of our treatment. So I think what I would like to see is more of a focus, not just on cure, but on our care. And I've seen it done very well, as Louise has outlined in the survivorship programme. We just need more of a focus on the advanced setting. So basically, what do we do? So I was very frustrated. That's a very polite term. I was mad as hell when I worked out that there was a big problem in metastatic cancer. And remember, I spent most of my career working in cancer research and development. I didn't really understand it or get it until I was a patient. Really didn't get it. Didn't understand where we needed to focus and where the problems were. So how do you solve this? So 2 years ago, literally at this meeting and others before it that year, started really talking in detail about what we needed to do, what was possible. Because remember, Seamus described drug development. Well, that's my background, but that's a very long time frame. And unfortunately, with a diagnosis like ours, I couldn't spend decades doing something that wasn't going to be realistic. So I decided to look at things that patients felt were important. Thankfully, through connections and through people's actually amazing goodwill, we very quickly got the idea up and running. Cancer Trials Ireland agreed to sponsor the idea, which, I can't underestimate how much of a punt or a risk all of these organisations took on this piece of research, because first of all, being led by a patient, which is quite unusual in the research setting. Secondly, looking at things that are not just directly about cure. Cancer Trials Ireland traditionally looks at drugs. The Irish Cancer Society traditionally fund research in that space. So there was a lot to overcome in terms of getting people to agree, but actually, even though there was a lot to overcome, people were very willing. And I kind of got a feeling very early on, just by how quickly people would agree to meet me, to talk about it, that there's something to this. And patients in particular very much supported me, and everybody in this room and everybody in Positive Living has given me so much support. Because this survey and the results of the survey is our survey. All of you have contributed in one way or another, either by refining how we do this, and there's more to come. So there will be more asks for all of you, because I really need this to turn into our survey and our asks. That's the point we're at. So in terms of how the survey was achieved, well, first of all, Professor Seamus Reilly, who you've heard speaking earlier, very willingly said yes to me. I don't think he quite realised what he was taking on when he said yes. But he was very willing to help me, and that was important, because even though, I as explained, have a career in research, I was not a clinician, and I was simply a patient at this time. So, I was realistic in understanding I needed good clinician support. And we sat down and decided we needed a good steering committee to guide us at a professional level. And so we sought and got very willingly members on the committee at quite a high level. Again, that was a big surprise. Nobody said no, actually, which is fascinating. Everybody agreed to come on board. We wanted to have the full spectrum of expertise, and we had psycho-oncology represented by Helen, Reilly, who's actually the national lead for the NCCP in psycho-oncology. So that just shows you the level we're talking about, who wanted to get involved. Again, remember that, when all these people agreed to do this, no one knew where this was going or if we were going to be successful or not. So a lot of them were putting their reputation on the line as well, which I'm incredibly grateful for taking a chance. Professor Fran Dwan, who's a very eminent radiation oncologist, helped us. Some of Seamus's senior registrars, Catherine and Rachel, and Yvonne Amara, who's involved. The reason I came across Yvonne was Yvonne's speciality is psychosexual psycho-oncology, essentially advising women with gynae cancers around some of the sexual dysfunctional aspects. So let's talk about sex, and she came on board very early as well. And also Mary Jane O'Leary, who's going to talk to us later this afternoon about palliative care. Again, all very eminent names. And Anne McBride, who you all know, another member of Positive Living from the North. So we wanted it to be an all-island survey at the very beginning. And very importantly, it needed to be patient-led. So, I mean, in some ways, it's actually phenomenal looking back that we managed to get from a little chat, myself and Seamus, in May 2022 to being here today to present the results. Like, that's pretty unheard of in the world of research, in terms of how fast we've managed to get to deliver. But actually, that speaks to the enthusiasm of you all, the enthusiasm of everyone who supported us. As I said, genuinely, nobody said no. At this point, and the support of Cancer Trials Ireland. And in particular, I just want to mention Emer Mulvaney, who's in the audience, who again took a risk and said, oh, I'll give you a hand with the first ever patient-led survey. Like, I don't think either of us really understood. It was great fun. But, you know, I think when people buy into a project like this and really follow it through with passion, it's not just about a job. Actually, I could sense from everybody who got involved, people really rode in behind it. And I took that to mean, first of all, recognition, yeah, there is a problem with metastatic cancer. I think that was the first thing I realized when I started this. It wasn't just me saying there's a problem, and everyone was so willing to come on board. What that said to me was, yeah, it's not just my imagination, it's not just what I'm seeing, there is a problem. And their willingness to engage, that was really helpful. But not only did we manage to get the results, but, you know, I can't underestimate to have 4 posters presented at the world's leading oncology conferences, ESMO and ASCO, is just phenomenal. I mean, to get put in 2 posters to ESMO, get them both approved, put in 2 posters to ASCO, get them both approved. You know, that actually also says that the world of academic oncology internationally knows there's a problem, and actually wants the solutions, and actually wants to hear what the patients think of as the solutions. I mean, it's blown me away. As I said, I've yet to hear a no. I shouldn't say that, but I honestly, genuinely have yet to hear a no in relation to this work. And that actually says a lot. So this puts us on a very strong footing. So our results are real. They've been scientifically validated. They've been published. They've been presented. We've more coming down the track in terms of a full scientific paper. You know, God, if I was in employment now, I'd be getting a promotion, but unfortunately not. But it's actually very rewarding because it basically says people understand there's a problem and people want to make change. And that's really important. So we're at the point of the results. And please, if anyone wants to get into the weeds on them, the leaflets were written by Emer Mulvaney on your chairs. They're really, really well done and really well presented for what is quite scientific data in some respects. They're really, really well outlined. The 4 posters were the posters that we presented at ASCO and ESMO. So they're the scientific data. There's more to come, but in the meantime, that's the vast majority of the results. If anyone wants to get into the details, then please contact me. Oh, am I going backwards? I am. So basically, in terms of what we interrogated with the survey, or what we asked in the survey, you all actually decided, 41 of you, 2 years ago, this meeting 2 years ago, decided on what the survey topics were. I came up with a list of 40 problems, let's say, or 40 areas that we felt needed a bit of focus. And you all told me what were the most important things that you wanted to get answers to, or for people to understand outside of the patient group. And we all, you all felt that information around prognosis needed to be interrogated, and how we got our original prognosis, who told us how much time was given. We really wanted a lot of focus on living with uncertainty, because the world of metastatic cancer is uncertain. And again, with lack of data, that's not going to help. But how do we deal with that? How do all of us cope with that? Do we understand our own diagnosis? Are we familiar with, the breakdown in terms of the subtypes, what that means, how they received it, what information they got? Do they understand about their own disease? Do they want to understand more? Are patients open or private in the diagnosis, within their family, within the communities? What issues are impactful in terms of patient sexuality, intimacy, fertility issues? All of those things you're not supposed to talk about, but we chose to talk about them and highlight them. Exercise, as Seamus said, exercise, if it was a medicine, will be very expensive, but it's not, it's there for free. It's a very important part of our care, actually. So we wanted to understand, well, are people starting exercise? Are they stopping it when they're diagnosed? We needed to get more data around that. Are people engaging with palliative care? Do people understand that palliative care is about symptom control as well as end of life? We wanted to interrogate that. And then we wanted to look at things like how much time it all takes being a patient and how much money it costs as a result of our illness. So these are just outlining really the type of people who filled in the survey. So along the way, people like the National Cancer Registry were extremely helpful in helping us understand a little bit more about the figures in Ireland insofar as that is possible. And basically, as a result of this work in the survey, they've told us that there's a minimum of 1,700 patients in Ireland with metastatic breast cancer in 2023. Now they recognise that's an underestimate. It's probably a higher number than that. But the important point is that 246 men and women completed this survey. So that survey represents more than 10% of us. Now that's a very important number statistically. If you have the voice of greater than 10% of any group of patients, that means it's a true representation of what people feel. So that was really important. And again, when we were talking about this as a steering committee, you know, the researchers made me very aware that it's very difficult to recruit people generally to metastatic cancer surveys or studies of any kind. In general, we're quite a difficult group to access in that regard. We managed to get 10% in 11 weeks. And that's just unheard of. 11 weeks the survey was only open for. We undertook a huge media campaign, again, thanks to Cancer Trials Ireland for allowing me that to go around and speak about it. But I always tell people, particularly the scientific community and the medical community, the reason why we hit 10% of all patient numbers in Ireland in 11 weeks is because there was a pent-up demand. And, you know, the comments that people put in the surveys were just, you know, heartbreaking in some respects, but actually just people telling me that that was the first time they'd ever been asked how they felt about their disease in a formal way, and that they really appreciated having a voice. You know, I would have finished my job then because that was enough to hear that that was just extremely valued. And it also showed me again, there's a huge need again. We managed to basically capture quite a broad spectrum in terms of the number of patients and for how long they've had the disease, and the different subtypes. So what this all means scientifically is that our results are valid, they're representative. We're not seeing some kind of skewed result of a little tiny subset. This is truly representative of what metastatic breast cancer patients in Ireland need and want. So I'm going to take you through very briefly, just to highlight, as I said, all the details are on the posters and the leaflet that's on your chairs. If you want any more information, happy to provide it. We've got a full paper coming out in the next few months, which we'll gather more data on. But basically, you know, like a lot of research, when you're designing your experiment or your survey in this case, you need to have an understanding of what the results are going to be. You need to have it in order to pitch them right, to get the questions right, and to ask the right questions. But even for, you know, seasoned researchers, we were all surprised at the results. Okay, first of all, in terms of what patients want, do they want access to their own medical notes? Absolutely, yes. 99% of us do. And that's, I mean, that's all. I still don't understand where that 1% is. I'm going to call that statistical margin of error because I believe it's 100%. And only 65% of us currently have access. Now, remember, in Northern, this was an all-island survey in the North. When I was presenting these results at ASCO, Anne's oncologist, actually, Anne McBride's oncologist, lovely man, he came over to me to let me know, he's very proud to let me know that in Belfast and in Northern Ireland since June, every patient in the North has access to their own information on an online portal where they get the results of their scans and their blood tests sent to them at the same time as the medic. So, yeah, I know we've a long way to go here, but listen, we have the data now to say, what we have is data to say we need access to our own notes. But I actually also say, yes, I'm aware of the projects that are going on in HSE in terms of digitization, and believe me, there's a mountain to climb there knowing some of it. But my argument always is, it's not just about having those fancy IT systems in place. Yes, we all want to get there. We recognise it's going to take a while. We're so far behind in Ireland. But actually, it's more about the culture, so that when any of you go into a clinic in the morning and you dare ask for a copy of your scan report, that you're not met with a wall of skepticism. Why would you want that? Oh God, I can't provide you with that. Now, there's some genuine reasons. There are issues. We all know there's issues in the hospitals in terms of resource, and simple things like printing off is not as simple sometimes. But I want to be in a situation in next year or the year after where I go in and ask, and you, doctor, who I haven't met before, for a copy of my results, I'm not met with a wall of skepticism. So I think cultural change, actually, as well as digital change, is really important. I'm not surprised, but 95% of us go and research our own condition. That speaks to a lack of detailed information to the level of detail we want. So we'll come on to the recommendations later, but again, I'm not surprised by that. And again, when you speak to professionals about it, there's kind of a spectrum of answers they'll give you in terms of the patient population, but we're pretty unified. What the survey tells us is that we're quite unified in terms of what we want. We want more details, and we want to understand in better granularity about our own conditions. In terms of the mental health burden, I think this figure shocked a lot of the experts on the steering committee. I wasn't really surprised, personally, having been a patient. 87% of us have self-expressed mental health needs. Now, to actually put down on a piece of paper that you're struggling with depression or anxiety, it's actually a big step for someone. So for 87% of us to say that we have problems with anxiety and depression and distress, that's huge. So again, we can pretty much say it's universal, and all of your patients are, why? This is kind of blindingly obvious. Of course they're depressed. Of course we're anxious. It's life-changing, this diagnosis. We get that. But now the doctors can see that there is a problem, and effectively what we need is support in that realm. One of the inspirations for the survey for me was when I was first diagnosed. I had through other family members exposure to palliative care, and I just think it's an amazing service. They're all angels. It's just amazing. And I couldn't understand why we weren't routinely referred upon getting the diagnosis to palliative care. And when I spoke to a lot of healthcare professionals, they said, the problem is, Siobhan, if we bring up palliative care with patients, they'll think that we're writing them off. They'll think that we're saying to them, sorry, we've nothing to offer you. Here you go to palliative care. So it was very much an either or picture I was being presented with. Now, I knew that wasn't the case, and I felt that patients were a little bit more sophisticated these days, and we were proven right. Over 83% of us are amenable to a palliative care referral early on in our diagnosis. At the moment, only 20% of us are offered it. So that's really important information. I'll come back to the recommendations on that. In terms of the impact of the disease on sexual wellness, 65% of us report an impact. Again, those numbers are actually very high when you look at the literature, but I'm not surprised. I don't think any of you are. And obviously it depends on the age that you're diagnosed, etc., and the age that you are now. But there's a very high impact on our sexual wellness. Remember, all of us are thrown into the menopause, no matter what age we're diagnosed at. So all of us have problems in that regard. And as we all know, with hormone-positive metastatic breast cancer, it's contraindicated to take HRT, which it's great to see that everyone's going down this HRT bandwagon, but what about us? We can't have it. So there's other things available. And as Seamus outlined now, a lot of the public hospitals, cancer hospitals, are setting up complex menopause clinics within oncology. Again, we want to see that rolled out nationwide because it's not always the same in all the centres. In terms of side effects, again, there's still some stigmatism around sexual side effects and menopausal side effects, so a lot of people don't bring it up. And then for the women and men under the age of 50 in particular, there's a huge issue with fertility in terms of losing your fertility and the supports around that. And I think having spoken to a number of you in this category, the issue is that you're written off as somebody who has a terminal condition, and therefore it's almost like fertility isn't discussed because, well, you're dying anyway. is kind of the approach. And what we want to say is that we welcome a more detailed discussion than that. And given that we are living longer, maybe some of that thinking needs to change in line with that. In terms of who provided them with the information, this is good. 79% of us received the diagnosis in the first place with consultant. That's really positive. We want to know more about our prognosis. Okay, you know, again, there is this kind of narrative from the healthcare professionals that the difficulty with giving prognosis for metastatic cancers is, back to my first slide, we don't have the data. You know, we don't have the data to guide us. And therefore you're talking about a range, and it's almost impossible when any of us are diagnosed in the first instance, even knowing our receptor subtype, to understand, well, what will that mean 10 years from now as well? You know, so it's actually it is a tricky and nuanced and subtle discussion, absolutely changing all the time, which is brilliant. But nonetheless, people still want to have that discussion with all its nuances and with all its ranges. And while some of the data isn't brilliant, only by asking for more information are we going to change that. So it is something we want to interact with. In other words, we don't want to be kept in the dark. In terms of the time it takes to be a patient, that was an interesting one when we were devising the survey at the beginning, and we were looking at the ranges to put in around the questions. You know, will we ask about the last 6 months? Will we ask about the last year? How many visits? Will we put in ranges? And it was interesting, everyone else on the steering committee, except the patients, had put in a degree or a ratio that was quite small. But actually, as patients, Anne and I realised, no, actually, the amount of time it takes is much longer than you all realise. Because see, as a doctor or a nurse, you're only seeing one part of the patient's treatment, the medical oncology part maybe, but they're forgetting about all the other stuff we have to do, like lymphedema, physiotherapy, psycho-oncology, getting our medications, ringing up our pharmacy, all of that they don't see. It's invisible to them. It's not invisible to us, unfortunately. So in other words, we had to keep expanding the time frame when we were writing the survey questions. And basically, on average, every 28 days, 70% of us spend 1 to 3 days navigating our healthcare through hospital. In the last 6 months, 25% of us have spent time in an emergency department. That's very high, okay? And it's even higher than most of the experts on the steering committee anticipated. And that's very important data because that's the first time we've described with numbers how much of the resources we consume, to put it in a policy perspective. So that's really important. We now have quantities around that. And so my argument will be, when I'm discussing with anyone, I can tell you how much the resources we consume, but I can also tell you that if you put in place psycho-oncology services for us, for nutrition, exercise, actually we will reduce those numbers as well. So in other words, I can now say that there will probably be a cost saving. And that's always important to understand the numbers and the money when you're having these discussions at a policy level. So that's really important data. 20% of us are unable to meet our monthly expenses. Now, I'm not surprised. I don't think any of you in the room as patients is surprised by that, but I know that the experts were surprised. Like, that's devastating financially. But I had to explain, and I still keep having to explain to people, especially at a policy level, that the vast majority of us have to give up work or at least cut down to part-time. Simply the toll of the condition and the treatments force us into that situation. As Helen described, it took me ages to get real and realise I couldn't continue. And most of us end up in that situation. So of course we're going to be financially penalised because none of us planned for this, let's face it. Exercise. No, Dr. McCaffrey will be coming along later, and I couldn't more highly recommend exercise as an amazing tool to help with both side effects of your treatments, but also mental health as well. And exercise, I know for me, I have bone mets, as many of you do in the room. I felt constrained with my bone mets in doing exercise because nobody ever sat me down and said, okay, you know all those multiple mets in your pelvis and your back, it's okay, go ahead and exercise. You know, naturally, when someone tells you you've got a very unstable pelvis, wherever it is, you're going to think, oh my God, is it okay for me to exercise? But if nobody says to you, go on ahead and exercise, and nobody gives you permission, in other words, medically, you're going to be scared. So 40% of us stop exercising, which is a real shame. and 40% start. So again, I would argue that if just the words spinal stability were uttered in a consultation with our medical oncologist, if someone just sat down and said, yes, you've got bone mets, but actually your spine is quite stable, and yes, you can exercise. So I feel really strongly about that everyone should be given an exercise prescription, as Professor Reilly described, when they're diagnosed, or as soon as possible thereafterwards, to really encourage you, because really exercise is the best medicine there is, without a doubt. So as I explained, we had the honour, and it was a huge honour. To put in context, I've worked in medicines research and development for 30 years. I've never had as much success on a publication level as I've had with this survey. It's really been really well received. You stand at posters at these conferences and you wonder, will anyone come along and talk to you? Is anyone interested? We were inundated. It was quite incredible, the amount of interest. And the amount of interest from the oncology community, from the broader radiation oncology community, from nursing. The amount, my email every day, I've got 10 requests to do talks, etc. There is a huge interest in this body of work, because people realise it's data that just wasn't available before, but also the power of the fact that it was written by patients, by us, by everyone in this room, and the recommendations, which I'm going to go through now, were also written by people in this room. So it wasn't just one person's fantasy, i.e. mine. It was everybody's desire to try and change things, not just for ourselves, but people behind us. We also have a large journal, hopefully in print in the next journal, outlining all of the full results in the next month or two, and we'll be doing some media attention around that when that happens. So what are the next steps? And this is important. We have the results now. We've published the results, most of them. Where do we go next? So, well, the most important job for me was to tell all of you what the results were, and for you guys to understand what that means. That's my most important job this year. I'm trying to get out and about and publicise to everybody the results. But it's actually, I've been astonished, people who've reached out to me asking for information. It's actually been brilliant to see that people do want to listen and hear us. I'm getting multiple requests for speaking, which is great. I need to also acknowledge the fact that this survey and the data from the survey that all of you collaborated with was the first ever patient-led project to be presented at a very important Irish Society for Medical Oncology meeting. It was the first time a patient was represented at that meeting. So that's the power of this data, by the way, which is your data. People really are genuinely interested in the story that we're telling here. We've spoken to some of the policymakers, and we will come back and speak to them more about some of the changes we're asking for. As I explained, we will have a launch of the full paper in the next month or two. We're just working on that at the moment in terms of planning and trying to get the most airtime around it and the most noise going around it. And what's very heartening from a researcher perspective, but also a patient perspective, is that there's more work going on with the data. That data set is very valuable. And there's more work going on. One of the registrars working with Seamus is looking at the differences between the north and the south. Are there any between the system in Northern Ireland and the south of Ireland? Are there any differences in terms of what we've asked for? So that's going on at the moment, and that's producing some really interesting data. There's somebody else looking at the data from the perspective of being diagnosed under 40 as opposed to being over 40. So in other words, the survey has turned into this amazing repository or data set for researchers to go and look at it. Remember, this all came from patients. Like, I can't overestimate, I should say, how important that is and the value that's being placed upon that. So where are we going? Well, I've thought about this a lot. So what does this all mean? What do these numbers all mean? And what's relevant for us? And really where I keep coming back to is, before the survey work, I would have said lack of data is the problem, and it was. And this survey has filled some of the gaps, not all of it. There's obviously much more work to do in that regard. But the other important thing that I've come to realise is, as Seamus said, his work is guided by those guidelines, those algorithms, which tell him and everyone internationally Basically, it provides a standard of treatment, a standard of care. And there's many guidelines out there, by the way, for metastatic breast cancer. There's the ESMO guidelines, there's the ASCO guidelines, there's the ones Seamus alluded to earlier, the ABC guidelines, advanced breast cancer. We don't have Irish guidelines for metastatic breast cancer, or indeed for any metastatic cancers. We have guidelines and algorithms for national guidelines for primary cancers, but not for metastatic cancers. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem is, and this is all of this information has come from all of you in this room, that there's huge variability in our care of women and men around Ireland. There's massive variability in scan intervals. Some of us are scanned every 3 months, some every 4, some every 5, some every 6. Where do those numbers come from? There's no evidence to support the scan interval, by the way. There is no data. So where does that come from? We are getting variety in terms of how we're scanned. Some of us have CT, some of us have MRI, some of us have PETs. Again, why? And unfortunately, when you don't have guidelines, this is what happens. Variability creeps in. I'm hearing stories and hearing questions from patients who are not on the gold standard treatments, and the gold standards are the ones that are expressed in those algorithms. They're the gold standard, the ASCO guidelines, the ESMO guidelines, the ABC guidelines. I'm seeing far too many patients who are not on gold standard, again, without guidelines. That leaves a huge problem. I'm hearing stories of people who are progressing. As we all know, our journey is that we engage with treatment, we take treatments, be that radiotherapy or hormone treatment or personalised, or whatever the case may be. And at some point, our cancer will become resistant and we move on to second line and then third line and then fourth line. That period when your cancer progresses is a really important time frame, both in determining what should happen next, but also in determining your trajectory and where you are in the disease course. And I'm hearing more and more stories from patients who are at that pivotal point of progression, i.e. a scan that says not stable anymore. Right, where do we go next? And they're not being reviewed at multidisciplinary team meetings, those decisions. Now, cancer, as Seamus has shown you, has got very complicated, both for the doctors and the nurses and the patients. And one person's intelligence or keeping up to date with the literature or ability to prescribe certain drugs shouldn't be dependent on that. We need to have a systematic approach, and we need to understand that every time when one of us progresses, because we all know at some stage we will progress, that our data, our scans, our decisions in terms of where we go to next are reviewed and discussed at an MDT, and that we also have an input into those decisions, because patient-guided care is also a gold standard approach internationally. So what I'm trying to show you here is that by not having standards, we're in the situation we're all in the room in 2024, which is there's huge variability in our care. Even just taking the public centres on their own, there's massive variability in our care. And when you have variability, mistakes creep in, unfortunately. So it took me a while and discussions with all of you included to understand what was the most important thing. I have a list of 10 here, that's a lot, right? I'm not going to get to number 2 in any policy discussion without someone getting bored. But what's the most important message? Actually, the most important message is number 10. Number 10 is we're asking and calling for national guidelines to be developed around metastatic breast cancer, but around metastatic cancers full stop. We need it to be understood, and I've really felt this more and more strongly as I've gone along with this research, that primary breast cancer is a different disease to metastatic breast cancer. It's 2 entirely different diseases. Primary cancer is you get your treatment, hopefully at the end of it you're free, but you go down the survivorship route, there's repercussions, and obviously recurrence is a constant theme, but we all know with metastatic breast cancer that never stops. We're on treatment for life. So to me, they're actually 2 different diseases. And we're almost at the point where we need people who understand that at a healthcare perspective, from medical oncologists to radiation oncologists to nurses. I think any of us who've been on this disease pathway for a while understand how incredible the nurses are in this country. We're very lucky. We have a very high level and standard of nursing care in this country. I was blown away by the support of the primary breast cancer nurses and the ANPs, advanced nurse practitioners, liaison nurses assigned. They're just phenomenal resources of information. That all goes away when you get metastatic. You don't have it. In some cases, some of the hospitals provide dedicated nursing support if you're on oral chemo, but that's not all of us. And if you're lucky enough, again, that's kind of dependent on your investigators' resources and their knowledge. I don't want it to be dependent on individuals, oncologists making these decisions. I think we should have national guidelines for metastatic breast cancer and ultimately all metastatic cancers with trained, specialised nurses, exactly like you get for primary breast cancer, a dedicated liaison nurse. That's my number one ask. The rest actually are easier once you start asking for that. The rest actually kind of fall in behind that. And indeed, the number one there is palliative care referral as standard of care. I think we're arriving at a point, and I hope the guidelines will iterate this as well going forward, where when somebody's newly diagnosed as a patient with metastatic breast cancer, there's a checklist in place, which is being guided by the national guidelines, which says, number one, within the first 3 months of diagnosed, of course, you want to get the treatment right. That's number one. But number two, have they had a palliative care referral? Have they had a referral to a nutritionist? Have they had a referral to an exercise specialist or a physiotherapist? Have they had a referral to psycho-oncology? So that they become not just the doctor remembering or the nurse remembering to ask you, but actually that's part of the standard of care. So we have a checklist and all of those things will be covered. We need to understand the impact. We do now understand the financial toxicity of this particular disease. And so, I mean, again, for most of us, for many of you I've spoken to over the years, the vast majority of us have never engaged with social welfare in our lives till we were diagnosed with this condition. And it's a real shock to not only have to learn how to navigate the system and all the rest of it, but to actually navigate the social welfare system. And it's complex. I'm still trying to understand it. So we need a social worker assigned to us as well to help us in that regard. So I think number 10 first. But more importantly for me, number 9, and I was very heartened with Louise Mullen's presentation and Seamus, is to understand that the patient voice is becoming more and more important and should be becoming routine. So in developing these guidelines, we simply ask that the patient's voice is incorporated into any changes therein. So basically, just to explain to you what's happening internationally. Since 2009 in the UK, they have had guidelines guiding their care, metastatic breast cancer guidelines. ABC, which Seamus alluded to, an amazing international organisation. If those of you who are just newly diagnosed, I'd urge you to look at their website, a fabulous website and resources. Their mission is to improve metastatic breast cancer care. They call it advanced breast cancer care, slightly different, but iterations of the same. And they very much guide the world in this regard. There's ASCO guidelines, there's ESMO guidelines, but in 2024, there's no Irish metastatic breast cancer guidelines, or indeed metastatic cancer guidelines. And in fact, I just did a quick word count in the current national strategy, which by the way, I welcome all the money that's been committed by the government. Advanced cancer is only mentioned once. Metastatic is mentioned 5 times. It's a very, very long document, but in fact, one of them is just defining what metastatic means. One of them is explaining that the term survivorship includes patients with metastatic care. One of them is about referring patients, and one of them is alongside that definition of advanced cancer. So in other words, there's nothing substantial. Now that's quite shocking in 2024, so we need to do something about that. That's where we're going with this. So I think what I hope you understand is we have great data now that's been recognised by the community internationally and scientifically. People are very interested in hearing our story, and it's our story. Now I need to move it into the next phase, which is about getting other people around me to help me get this into policy changes for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's important in any phase of work when you're moving through a project like this, that it's not just defined by one person, i.e. me, that we need to get more and more people working on this and all saying the same thing. Plus, frankly, there's only so many places I can go and do. And finally, just to explain to you all that I've made a commitment and actually a decision, and you'll all understand this, when I was first diagnosed and I started doing this work, that I would only spend 3 years at it. I promised my family, and we're coming up to 3 years. So I am going to hold that promise. Might slip it into 2025, a few months. But I made that promise because I was very determined that I would only spend 3 years of, as you all know, what is very precious time. So I'm moving off the patient advocacy stage, but I need other people to come in behind me and help work with me. So I'm looking for volunteers, and the next piece of work we need to do is come up with some communication medicine messages and do some media work around publishing of the journal, but more importantly, advocating for changes and advocating for metastatic cancer national guidelines in this country. So basically, please contact me if you're interested. I've already put my hand on a few shoulders, but the more the better. And we really need to turn this data into our story. So thank you very much.
I think we need a standing ovation